I think we'll go ahead and get started for this evening. Welcome, everybody. This is the Sammamish Planning Commission remote for February 18th. And let's get started with Jackie and our meeting accessibility notice.
Thank you, Chair Boffman. Pursuant to the Governor's Emergency Proclamation 20-25, the city is unable to provide an in-person location for the public to listen to the Planning Commission meeting this evening. Meetings are still accessible to the public, and public comment is able to be submitted. To view live, you can visit the city website at www.sammamish.us/TV21, the city YouTube channel, or on Comcast Channel 21 within Sammamish only. To view the meeting later, meeting videos are available the day after the meeting on the city website, on the city YouTube channel, and on the Comcast Channel 21 within Sammamish only. Thanks.
Thanks, Jackie. Okay, let's go ahead and do a roll call. As a reminder, I'll call your name. Please unmute yourself and say something and raise your hand to let the record state that you were here. So, Mark Boffman, I'm present. Vice Chair Ratuja Indapir.
Present.
Mike Bresco.
Present.
TC Labby.
Present.
Josh Amato.
Here.
Karen Malcolm.
Here.
And is Karthik here? Karthik Sitaraman? I don't see him. Okay. Thank you. Next is approval of this evening's agenda. Does anyone have any comments or adjustments proposed of the agenda for this evening? Okay, seeing no comments, we'll call the agenda approved by common consent. Next is approval of the minutes from our February 4th meeting. Did everyone get a chance to look at those minutes, and does anyone have any corrections? Okay, even with the small pictures, I can see head shaking back and forth, so no comments. We'll call the meeting minutes from February 4th approved by common consent. Next is public comment for non-agenda items. Jackie, go ahead.
Again, pursuant to the Governor's Emergency Proclamation 20-25, the city is unable to provide an in-person location for the public to listen to the virtual Planning Commission meeting this evening. Meetings are still accessible to the public, and public comment can be submitted. For verbal comment, up to 3 minutes of non-agenda public comment may be provided per person live during the meeting. In order to provide verbal public comment, you must call in. Please call the following number and input the access code when prompted. The phone number is 1-872-240-3311, and the access code is 699-839-229. Once you have joined, you'll be placed on mute. The meeting operator will unmute you when it is your turn to comment. You'll hear an automated voice say unmuted when that occurs, and the operator will ask you to begin your comment. Please hang up when your comment is complete. It looks like we have one caller on the line here. I will go ahead and unmute you. Please begin by stating your name and where you live for the record.
Hi, my name is Mary Wichter, and I live at 408 208th Avenue Northeast in Sammamish, Washington. Been there for over 20 years. And for the non-agenda public comment tonight, I wanted to review some material and information that I presented to the February 9th City Council study session on Development Regs Phase 2, which will be coming up at Planning Commission. So there was a Development Regs Phase 1, and the Phase 2, that was then in September 2018 through May of 2015-2019. The Development Regs Phase 2 are upcoming. And if you remember way back, the Planning Commission had done a great job coming up with what was called some litmus tests. So they had the objective for Development Regs Phase 2 to improve the outcome of housing being built in Sammamish so that it would be more in line with community expectations and character. And for the litmus test, which is sort of like a pH test, you're supposed to ask, does the topic or proposed code or changes create the potential to improve housing stock in ways the community looks to see it improved? And that was submitted by the Commission. And then city staff had another litmus test. Does the topic or proposed code or changes provide missing or essential tools to help staff influence the outcome through a permit review process? Plus, does it improve clarity and usability for all city code to all users? And then I suggested at the City Council meeting that there be 3 more litmus tests added. Once again, you're asking, does the proposed code changes or topic have more stringent requirements in the context of environmentally sensitive critical areas or shorelines than just what is required or applied for flat and already cleared lands? And hazards include erosion, landslides, steep slopes, and seismic, which are all known as geologically hazardous areas. Also, CARAs or CARAs, or known as critical aquifer recharge areas, wetlands, streams, and fish and wildlife habitat corridors and conservation areas, and also to consider, too, the native growth protection easement areas for trees, forests, and vegetation, because a lot of those exist in our city. So a new 4th litmus test would be, does the code or topic or changes address any missing requirements or increase the application or extend changes to single-family homes and not just short plat or long plats, which are 2 to 9 lots or over 10 lots, so that a lot of people build on vacant land when they redevelop, remodel, or put a new lot on a vacant home. So this test should make sure that single-family homes on existing lots are covered too. And then the 5th litmus test is to check to see if Sammamish Code and regulations include past rules, gaps, and are appropriate for current and modern times, that they're as effective as the King County Code or other city-like codes. So the reason I'm speaking tonight is on the agenda topic, I did submit a PDF if you could play that during the agenda, and I'll speak to litmus test number 5, other city codes. Thanks.
Thank you very much for your comments, Mary. It looks like that was our only caller, so I'll hand it back to you, Chair Boffman.
Thanks, Jackie. Okay, this evening we have a new business item. So there's some work being done on low impact development and stormwater management, and we're going to have a presentation from David Pyle and Danica. And Danica, I'm going to probably get your last name pronounced wrong, with Globacar. And I think David's going to start us off.
Yes, Chair Boffman, good evening. David Pyle, Community Development. We are here tonight to walk through some proposed code amendments that our City Council has given us direction to take on as part of our work plan. I'm also here to walk through a work plan that the Community Development Department has taken on in partnership with the Public Works Department in an effort to try to front load the permit process, make sure our applicants are aware of additional resources and things to consider when they are designing a project. We have a presentation that we put together. Danica and I will be passing it back and forth to each other. The initial portion of the presentation I'll take on, then I'll pass it off to Danica and the like. So if you see us communicating back and forth, the purpose there is for us to make sure we're on cue, so to speak. So it's not quite as easy as doing it in person, but we're here to do our best. So if you have any questions, feel free to stop us or hold your questions till the end. We're here to get as much information out for your consideration as possible. So I'll go ahead and attempt to share my screen now. Bear with me for 1 sec. Let's see.
And David, it's the one that's titled Final. Did you get that one?
Hold on 1 sec. Let me just check. We were changing it up till the last minute. I had the one that was timed out at 5 o'clock. I don't know if it's titled Final.
I think that was it.
Got it. Hold on 1 sec.
Can I just mention, and you will correct me if I'm wrong, but this is kind of the overview is we're going to do this presentation, then we're going to have a work session on, looks like March 18th, and then I think though in a subsequent Planning Commission meeting, we will have a discussion, and are we going to then make a recommendation to council, or what is the conclusion of that by the maybe 3rd meeting?
Yeah, great question. So the first part of this presentation tonight is informational only. It's something that we're already doing. It's already underway. We're hoping to wrap it up here in the middle to end of February. And it's funded through our on-call consultant contract. We have AHBL, who is our on-call planning consultant, helping us out. We'll talk about what they're doing. The second part is really what the work plan is that's been directed by the City Council. And the next meeting on this, you'll be holding a workshop where we'll present some draft code changes. It's pretty simple in its scope, but we want to make sure to ramp it up appropriately, provide background through this presentation, then allow you, with the next meeting, opportunity to consider some targeted, very specific code amendments. And then finally, at a third meeting, you'll be holding a public hearing where you can continue to ask questions, consider some additional changes you might want to see added, and then make a recommendation to the City Council. If you feel like you need another meeting on that, on the topic, we're always open to suggestions and want to make sure you have all the information you need. Likewise, if you have questions after this meeting, feel free to reach out to Danica or myself. We're happy to talk with any individual commissioners about this topic. One thing we want to avoid in emailing back and forth is the creation of a quorum through someone asking a question to the whole group, someone else responding. That is considered to be a quorum under public record rules. So we just want to be aware that it's okay to send in a question to the staff. But what we would ask is that you allow staff to respond to the entire commission rather than volleying back and forth within the commissioners, within the commission group over email. So for those new commissioners, it's just one of those nuances of public records rules. Thank you, Mark, for the opportunity to explain that. If you have any more questions about email traffic and what to avoid and what are the don't do's and what are the please do's, I'd be happy to talk more about that. Unless there are any more questions leading into this, I found the tab on the share screen and I'm happy to share my screen and start this off. Okay, seeing none, I will do that. Let's see, share. Let's see, and I'm pulling up the presentation. So if you can't see it, please let me know. All right, it sounds like everyone you can see it? Got it. I only have one screen tonight, so I'm not on the multiple screen setup, so I can't see
Yep, we can see it. Go ahead, David.
Great, thank you. So tonight we're here to talk about low impact development and stormwater management. When you think about this topic, we want to think about the fact that we engage customers at all different points in their thought process around how they're designing a project, whether it's someone who's got an idea about something they want to build, or whether it's an applicant who's deep in the process of actually putting together construction drawings and is going through the permit process. So this is tailored to provide information at all different points in the process. The purpose of this first portion of the presentation is to discuss current administrative changes underway to incorporate low-impact development in all project phases. And the second part of this presentation is to discuss upcoming code amendments to Titles 13, 20, and 21A to modify drainage adjustment application process. The first part, low-impact development changes that are already underway, is focused on building a better applicant at the point of pre-application through outreach and education. This includes promotion of a sustainable site planning mindset, consideration of existing landscape features, awareness of existing city rules, early attentiveness to stormwater manual low-impact development requirements, and promoting preservation of community character. The pre-application and guidance process, where we intercept customers and try to get them as much information as possible, is broken up into 4 phases. When I first started working at the city, we used to have customers that would come into the front counter, the planning desk, if you will, the permit center, and they would line up, sometimes 2, 3 people in line, up to 10 people in line at a time, to talk to staff about projects. and we would look up their property, help orient them to our code. They would ask a bunch of questions. We would provide the best answers that we could with the limited amount of information that we had. And they would typically, walk away with an understanding of what the process was. One of the problems that we used to face was that an applicant would walk away thinking one thing, and the city staff would walk away thinking something else. When I came on board, we did not keep records of these transactions, and we were not tracking all of the different inquiries we had on different properties. In about 2016, we changed that, and we created what's called the project guidance process. And we largely shifted the counter traffic over to a JotForm online portal where an applicant would submit an inquiry to the city, and that would create a record. And then we would respond accordingly. And what that is it's the first opportunity for us to intercept a customer with questions. It's a free process. We provide a limited scope in information that we give to them. And the idea here is that we could start to track all of the different things that people are asking us about. And we could then start to get statistics around it. We could understand what are the most important things people want to know about, so we could tailor public information to their needs and help answer those questions, so that when they go on the website, they can find answers to our most common questions. So that's the project guidance process, where an applicant has a question or a potential applicant has a question. The next step in the process is optional, and I should say the project guidance process is also optional, but it's free. The second step is the pre-development services process, which is a fee-based service. It's optional, and that's where somebody has really specific questions about a property, about our code, about how our code might apply to their property. We do charge for our time in responding to applicant questions, researching issues, et cetera. One of the problems that we used to face at the counter was applicants would come in or consultants would come in and ask us a bunch of questions at the counter, and we were almost doing the design work for the customer. One of the sort of do not do's in government is don't design someone's project for them. You can get into a lot of trouble that way. So we had to be very careful that we were not crossing that line. With this process, we're able to be careful about that, but we're also able to provide some additional assistance to somebody that needs it. The third point, which is a required process, and it's a flat fee-based process, is the pre-application conference. And this is required by code for things like short subdivisions and subdivisions and conditional use permits and things that are a little more complicated. And we require an applicant comes in and gives us a preview of their proposal. And what happens is we pull together a multidisciplinary team that includes someone from our permit center, someone from planning, someone from public works, someone from parks, someone from fire, and we all look at the plans together in a room with an applicant and give them feedback. And again, like I said, it is required for certain application types. The type of application that it's not required for is a single-family home on a vacant lot that is pretty straightforward, so that doesn't have extensive wetlands or streams and that type of scenario. Finally, the fourth step in the application formation, if you will, is the submittal of the application. So this is after someone has ideally taken advantage of project guidance, maybe taken advantage of pre-development services, and possibly, if required, taken advantage of a pre-application conference. They then will put together their application materials and submit it through My Building Permit, typically is the portal that we use now, or mostly online, almost all electronic. And they would submit that to the city for permit review. So with each of these steps presents an opportunity for us to have what I call an intervention with an applicant. We want to make sure that an applicant is aware of our rules, make sure they're not missing anything in their proposal. Oftentimes, different applicants, depending on how they're oriented and in their comfort level, become very hyper-focused on certain things like tree protection or like septic or sewer. So what we're trying to do is make sure they're aware of the full array of things they might encounter in design. But it also presents opportunities for us to infuse some concepts around low-impact development and appropriate site design. So with this effort, the first objective was to make sure full consideration is being given to a wide range of options early in the applicant's thought process, so less impactful design doesn't come as an afterthought. And how we do this, like I just said, is intercept property owners, applicants, designers, architects, engineers, et cetera, early when a project is still an idea. And the idea here is that what we do is we're able to intercept them and we're able to guide them in a way that some of the things they're required to do aren't an afterthought. Early in my career, I used to do single-family home review. I've done almost every type of permitting that's possible out there. And one of the takeaways that I have from that is that it's always easier for an architect or an engineer or a designer to incorporate things that are required by code or that are things that the city is looking for in a design early in the process. Typically, once a design has been formed and an applicant or a homeowner, for example, has become wed to an idea, it's much harder to reverse that. And that is typically when you see them ask for forgiveness in the form of some sort of an adjustment or a variance or something. So reaching them early is important. The next is to treat existing site features as assets and incorporate them into the design as opposed to design that results in destruction. So this, again, is a problem that I used to experience where an applicant will go meet with an architect. You know, they might be driving down the street and they'll see a house plan and they'll say, I want that house. And they'll find out who designed it and they'll go and buy the house plan. And then they'll go shopping for a parcel. And then they'll try and force the parcel to fit the house plan, which is exactly the opposite of what we want them to be doing in Sammamish. We want an applicant to be aware of the property that they're using to build for their future, their investment, and to be aware of the opportunities and constraints that it has. So what we're going to be doing is require applicants complete a site assessment and map their site's resource opportunities and constraints, and design the project to fit the site and take advantage of opportunities while limiting impacts that are there because of constraints. The next is to demonstrate how disparate regulations work collaboratively towards a common objective, minimizing the site impact. The city of Sammamish has pretty decent rules, but those rules are in what I call disparate portions of the code. They're sort of fragmented. We have tree retention, critical areas, grading limits, stormwater, building height, site access, impervious surface, lot coverage, setbacks, sewer, septic, to name a few. And it's kind of overwhelming for an applicant and a designer to think about all of these at the same time, yet they have to. Because if they don't, then what we end up doing is we're on the receiving end of an error in design, and an applicant then is not too happy about any one of these sets of rules because they have to find a way to make it work to get a permit. So we end up with, again, requests for variances or adjustments. So we want to make sure to make an applicant aware that they have to figure out a way to incorporate all of these different rules that are found in different sections of our codes into their site plan as part of that is their objective to get a permit. So it's an outreach effort in that regard. The next is that applicants do not claim low-impact development is infeasible as a result of afterthought and failure to consider low-impact development standards early in the design process. This requires educating applicants regarding the city's stormwater regulations and prompt consideration of low-impact development with site design. So we really want them to, again, be thinking about this early. You know, where on the site am I going to disturb? How am I going to integrate? The most classic one is a septic system with a drain field and a fairly extensive stormwater infiltration system. Where does all of that go? Then you add tree protection to the mix. Then you add setbacks to the mix. You know, you start to look at how things work. The building has to go in a certain place. Gravity it has to be accounted for. You look at connections and where those things are, where different connections are to different utilities, where the road connection is for driveway and access, and all of those things. You can see that it creates kind of a puzzle that can be difficult to solve. So we want to make sure that an applicant is aware of all of these rules so that they can't claim that any one set of rules are infeasible on a property later because they didn't consider it. The next is change the cultural practices around site design and construction. One of the issues that we have, again, as I already described, is that an applicant might become committed to a design and not want to change course or redesign the project to account for some of the regulations that they're required to demonstrate compliance with. So what we want to do is make sure that we demonstrate alternative methods of construction are feasible, and we provide educational resources to applicants early on to assist them. Our goal here is to help them be successful, and we want to make sure that early awareness is accounted for in their design process. Are there any questions or comments from the Commission?
I just want to say that this sort of customer-centric approach is really great, and I appreciate the thought going into it. I know that the end result will be a better result for everyone, but it can be very frustrating going through this process, and thinking about the way the customer is thinking about it will be really helpful, I think, on both sides. So I think this process change will lead to some really good outcomes.
Thank you. Yeah, we're really excited about it, and you know, our goal is to make sure we have successful customers that actually, you know, find it possible to implement our code, and it's not just a barrier. We don't want to be a barrier to their success, but at the same time, we're also charged with administering codes and granting permits that demonstrate compliance with requirements. So, it's a complex world to live in.
Are there going to be any sort of metrics and statistics about how many individual customers make it through each of the phases and what their success rate is, or any customers that are flagged as being in non-compliance and whether or not they did or did not utilize the process?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, you know, we already have metrics on the numbers of revision cycles that we go through. So for me, one of the metrics that would be a good indicator of whether we're successful is the number of revisions or corrections that we are required to go through in related to site planning with an applicant. So if we see, you know, the goal that I always aspired to was that it was no more than 2 rounds of review and you reach your decision point, right? There's this sort of misnomer, or I guess strange perception out there that applicants can just perpetually go in a round and round cycles with the city, and that's not the way we do business. You know, we want applicants to be well informed when they're designing something. We want something to come in as an actual permit, that 4th step in the timeline that I showed you. We want it to actually be mature. We want an applicant to invest fully in how to comply with our code, and we want to be able to provide them, you know, some corrections that maybe they missed something that was minor, or there's a few things they need to consider that they didn't consider, and then they come back with their revised plans and we can approve it. That's the optimal world. The alternative world is where an applicant believes that it's what I call design by review, and that is unfortunately the culture of some designers and some applicants out there, is that they have the belief that they can perpetually just keep resubmitting the same thing and repackaging it in different ways, and eventually they will wear down the city staff to the point where the city staff will just approve it because they're so tired of dealing with the applicant. I've seen that end of it. That's the extreme alternate end. So our goal would be to have something, you know, the second time that they're resubmitting, so after the second round of comments, it would be approved. That's our realistic goal. the optimal goal obviously would be what I call a first review decision. So I guess the metric to answer your question that we could use is the number of rounds of review that are required and the corrections that are required related to site planning.
David, can I ask, I'm trying to track in my mind, and maybe I'm jumping ahead to the next step in this, but for someone who's got a piece of property and they're building their own house on there, and they don't, when you look at the steps that you had shown previously, they're not necessarily required to have a touch point as early in the process. How will this be accomplished in a practical sense for making sure that, a couple of landowners and their architect will recognize this alternative process and thought given to what we're asking, if they're not even necessarily required to have a touch point until later on?
So one of the comments that our city council had on this was, and this is going to be something for the council to consider, and we'll get that and get into this, or excuse me, the commission to consider in the next portion of this presentation, is that we require, if I go back, bear with me for one sec, I don't want to make anyone seasick, so I apologize, is that we, for the first one listed here, project guidance, is that we actually change the code, which would be in Title 20.05 of the municipal code. We could then require project guidance be one of the steps that anybody has to take for a proposal of a certain scope, right? And what this does is it requires they come in and check in with us, and it gives us an opportunity to give them the low impact development questionnaire, to give them the site design resource list, to prompt that thought process. We're not always going to be successful. You can't always you can't always change someone's practices or how they do things. But for people that are new to the business, or a homeowner who's looking to do an addition to their home or build a sport court or something, it'll really help them in guiding them about what type of professional consultant services they might need. If they need a civil engineer to help them with stormwater design, it might make them think a little differently about where they're going to site the sport court on the property, if there are trees that need to be protected, so that they don't, become enamored, if you will, with a certain way of doing something. Before they get too far down the path, we have that intervention. So does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think so. I think probably the part of the answer too is you're just trying to catch more folks than what is the case now, and there will always be a few that slip through until a later step. But if you can figure out some way to catch more of them, then you can reduce the incidence of some of these issues.
And one of the other things that we were faced with early on in my time is a high number of code compliance cases that were the result of people doing something that the code didn't allow, and then when confronted, they would say, "Well, I went into the city permit center, and they told me I didn't need a permit." And we're like, "Well, who did you talk to?" And they don't know. They don't have an answer. Well, now if someone says that, we tell them that's not the process we have. We don't actually have that type of drop-in, over-the-counter informal service. We require that you enter information into a JOT form, and we create a record based on your property address, parcel, et cetera. So we've seen a decline in the number of code compliance cases that are using that excuse. I'm hopeful that we can get down to just a very few trying to use that excuse, because it's simply a practice that we don't follow anymore.
I have a question, please. I am a person who came here and got caught in this process and had to go back and start over from square one after I had already engaged a builder and had an architect draw up plans and have the civil engineer create the stormwater piece of it. It seems to me that the builder was the one who's responsible for these mistakes that were made and not getting the guidance that we needed. Is there a way, and I have no knowledge of how this works, is there a way, or are builders required to register with the city if they have intent of building here? Because it would be nice if you had a list of builders who are going to build here and get this information out to them so that they know what they have to do, and the home builder themselves, the individual, isn't caught learning as you go and finding out, how things should have been after considerable money has been spent.
Yeah, so that it's great that you asked that question. That was a point of conversation that we actually had at about 9:15 this morning with our development regs phase 2 project that you'll be hearing more about. And the issue there is first, we can't dictate who can and cannot build in the city right now, not the way we're set up. What we can do is we can create a training program. When I was in Bellevue, for example, we had just adopted new critical areas rules that were fairly complex, and not all of the builders and designers really knew how they worked. So what we did was we created a training series, and we invited all the applicants that were in our system that had ever submitted application. We sent out to email addresses, mailing addresses, and we invited all these consultants and all these builders in for this training series. And we had really good turnout. And it was a 3-day series. We catered it with lunch, tried to try and, make sure people would attend. And what we did as a result of that was we created a preferred consultant list. And what that meant was that if you were an applicant looking to build in the city and you wanted to understand who knew the city's process and who knew how the city's rules worked, you could go to that list. And when the builder or the designer or whomever it was that participated and was on that preferred consultant list provided an application that was contrary to what the training had informed them, we had the option of taking them off the list. They were no longer a preferred consultant. And the response was great, because what ended up happening was these consultants wanted their names on the list, and they also wanted to be successful for their customer. So we ended up training several hundred consultants and builders. I'd like to do something similar in Sammamish. I do need the budget to do that. I don't have those resources available. That's one way to address that question. The other way to address the question is, and we've explored this and we need more legal feedback on it, is to talk about a building industry specific business license that is a Sammamish issued business license, not just a state business license, that would provide for our tracking of the performance of some of our consultants and builders in the city. That one would definitely require additional legal feedback. I'm not aware of it being something we could do or something we could not do. So that's one that we've been tracking and that we're going to definitely be engaging legal on.
I think what you did in Bellevue is great. I think it's wonderful, and it's for the good of the whole community, not just the people who are building. But if everybody's informed, then mistakes won't happen. And I might also suggest that to do a 3-day workshop would be expensive, staff-wise, and the event place and so on. But you could do a series of videos that would be very informative, and then if there were further questions, to get onto this preferred list. I think that's a wonderful idea, because if you come here from, out of state, out of city, whatever, you don't know where to start looking for a good builder. So you just kind of go to the internet, and of course the internet tells us everybody's wonderful.
Thank you. That's a great suggestion. We've one other thing that I might add on to that is the possibility of a video series that ends with some kind of a test, and you have to pass the test. And I think about these trainings that I'm required to go through for FEMA now. There's a video series you have to watch, and at the end of the video series, well, there's a test. And the test is actually pretty complicated, and I've had to retake them, admittedly, sadly, but you know, it's really helpful and it helps keep focused.
I think I'll put a fairly quick question, but it has to do with the time frame, and specifically if I'm an applicant and I'm looking at this pre-application process, will that look to me like it's a longer process and more involved or shorter? And then the second part of that is when I get into actual, construction and hopefully avoiding some of the mistakes that could occur, would it actually shorten the total project time? Is that one of the objectives of this?
Yeah, so the idea here is that it's not only a shorter timeline for someone, it does require more research and learning up front. But what it does is instead of, a builder coming in from, South King County and submitting an application based on what they are aware is the standard process, and then we have to go through extensive corrections, right? If we catch them and require their submittal early through a project guidance, and then they can take the feedback and then apply that to a application submittal, then in theory that cuts down on the amount of time that the project is in review, permit review, right? There's this perception out there in the building world that permitting just takes forever, and you always hear these horror stories about how a permit took so long to get approved, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that applicants that really aren't getting it right and applications that just don't meet our code really do take longer to review and to approve. And I distinctly remember the days of permit review where you basically, I would, during the peak in Bellevue when I was reviewing permits, you'd get, on your desk, there'd be a stack of 30 files and paper every morning, and you'd have to get through that stack of 30. And at the end of the day, you'd have, 20 that are on the approved stack and 10 that are on the need a correction stack. And it might take until the end of the week to write a correction letter for those 10, which are now 50. And it just takes longer. Whereas the ones that were approvable, they went right to the permit center to be issued. And that's just unfortunately the way it works is if you don't get it right, you end up in this a little bit more of a process heavy, we have to write a correction letter, you have to resubmit, and the perception is that the city's not doing their job. But the reality is that there's poor communication between the city and the applicant. The applicant likely didn't understand the submittal requirements, and the applicant tried and thought what they did was appropriate, but it missed the mark. Now the city's having to write a correction letter to explain it, and you can see how that just spirals on from there into an unfavorable situation for both the city and the applicant.
Yeah, and it appears that what's going on here with the pre-application process would really mitigate those issues of getting it wrong and all those cycles of rework.
That's our goal. Not always successful, but that's our goal.
Any other questions on this, or should we move on?
Yeah, the very last slide, David, could you go back one, please? Okay, change cultural practices around site design and construction. You don't mean, when you use the word construction, you don't mean the actual building process, do you?
Well, with site planning comes, it influences the building process. One of the issues that we have had is, the applicant is pretty good at, and the city is pretty good at doing the whole plan review thing where they submit a permit application, we review it, we approve it. And then what happens is that whole bundle of stuff that was approved, the construction plans, the construction conditions of approval, any of the other terms around how the project is to be built, that gets handed off to an entirely different team. So what ends up happening is it goes from the architect and the engineer and the plan reviewer and the planner to a construction manager and a construction crew and a construction inspection team. And the two are in different offices. There might be a different company with the builder. They work different hours at the city. And the two groups don't necessarily talk to each other. So one of the things that we're looking at improving is project handoff and project delivery. And that's where we're really making sure that we're clear about what the terms of construction are, that the planner and the plan reviewers actually are doing a pre-construction meeting with the construction crew to make sure there's an actual project handoff, if you will, right? One of the problems that we see happen, it doesn't happen all the time, but it happens with some frequency. Is so if you're on a single family home lot and you're trying to build a house and there's that orange construction fence that is up on the site. It includes some erosion control fencing that's keyed into the ground to stop water from moving off, that's silt laden, and it really is supposed to be the limits of grubbing, the limits of grading, the limits of construction. And you're supposed to be protecting the existing native or other vegetation that's already established, not impacting tree root zones and all that. Well, what happens is the design team may not have thought it through totally in terms of what is needed for space. And you might find that you're putting the foundation in, and then now you're starting to frame the house. And, oh, wait a minute, I've got to get an excavator around to the other side of the house. And what they'll do is they'll rip out the fence and move the fence and get the excavator in. Well, they weren't supposed to do that. That's a violation of the terms of the permit. And part of that is because there isn't the oversight on the part of the designer that's seeing. So the idea here is that we're trying to drive home early with the designers that they have to think about how it's actually going to be built and how that is going to be accounted for in site design. We want them to be successful. We don't want to be fining them for moving the fence. We don't want to be stop working them for taking the fence down. We often see things like a lumber delivery, and it's on a private street, and they don't know where to put the lumber, but there's more land, it's just fenced off. So what are they going to do? They're going to take down the fence and store the lumber there. Well, that invariably becomes an extension of the construction site. So that's what this is meant to be, is to clean up practices of construction to actually follow through on the plan that was approved.
Okay, I get it now. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. Good question.
Anybody else? Okay, let's go on.
Right, so I'm going to pass this off to Danica now, who is far more knowledgeable than I on the drainage adjustments. She'll be cueing me at times for or pinging me for my portion, and I'll be moving the presentation through. So she'll be saying next slide. So I apologize for any awkwardness in that. It's just how we do it when we're in different locations online. Danica?
Yeah, thanks, David, and good evening, commission members. So I will also note that this is my only slide of the evening. It's a slightly different presentation than what David and I presented to council, and I'll be presenting a little bit of the technical background of drainage adjustments for those who are not as familiar with them, and what they are and what they're used for and current processes. And then I'll turn it back over to David to discuss the proposed changes that we think would be beneficial for the public. And I apologize, like working from home, there is background noise occasionally, so please forgive me. Drainage adjustments, for those of you who don't know, I'll take a step back actually. So most projects that come into the city have to go through a drainage review. This is for most single family homes have to go through a drainage review process all the way up to large subdivisions, up to UZDPs. almost all applications have to go through a drainage review, which is where the engineers explain in a technical information report how they propose to meet the drainage requirements. And then our engineers at the city review those plans and review that proposal and compare it to our drainage manual, which is a 1,000-page technical guidance book. And we are able to say, yes, this proposed plan meets the requirements. Sometimes, though, and there's a lot of drainage requirements in that manual, but sometimes applicants have challenges meeting those requirements. And when that happens, they request a drainage adjustment. So this is a little different from a variance, which I'm not as familiar with as you all are. But because an adjustment is not a variance from code, it is an approved method of design in the drainage manual. But it recognizes that, hey, sometimes an applicant cannot follow the exact letter of the law. So a drainage adjustment allows the applicant to propose an alternative system that still meets the intent of that drainage requirement. So you can see here the strict definition is a request, a drainage adjustment is a request by an applicant to vary from a stormwater requirement and propose an alternate system. And I'm very clear with this with everyone who I speak to about this. It's not a get out of jail free card. It doesn't mean that somebody's typically doing less work. It's just they're trying to meet the requirements in a different way, an alternative way. Some of the key words that I use to describe this are, it must provide a compensating and comparable system. The director, so our Public Works Director, has discretion to approve, and that alternative system that the applicant proposes with a drainage adjustment is evaluated on a lot of factors, and some of them are, this is only a handful of them, but safety, the environmental impact, maintenance are just some of those factors. So typically what happens, so I'll describe a little bit of the current process, and David, if I misspeak, feel free to jump in and correct me. The current process is that when an applicant gets to the building phase of a permit, they submit a technical information report, which is how they get through drainage review, and they say, here's our plan for drainage on the site. And that's also where they could say, ooh, we can't quite meet this particular requirement the way the manual tells us to. So, hey, city, we would like to have a drainage adjustment that we want to do something else instead. And staff are often placed in the position where we have to evaluate that. I give a recommendation to my Public Works Director to approve or disapprove. And adjustments can span the full gamut from small projects, from people who are trying to put a deck addition onto their house or a new deck and need an adjustment because the code is very restrictive, to a subdivision that's looking at a larger type of drainage adjustment, an adjustment, for example, from water quality. Instead of doing a large sand filter vault for water quality, they might produce a smaller or propose a smaller footprint water quality treatment facility, and that gives them more buildable space. So those are just some examples. And then for scope, just for your context, we've probably approved about 14 or 15 adjustments only in the last 4 years or so, just so you get an idea of, okay, we're talking about 3-ish, maybe 4 adjustments per year. So that's the current process. But what we found is that some developers will paint a rosy picture, and I'm stealing David's words here. Developers will paint a rosy picture in the early stages of development, say, sure, no problem, we can meet all the exact requirements of your drainage to the letter of the law, it's going to be great. And then they get beyond the public process, they get to the building side of things, and that's when they say, ooh, we can't quite meet the requirements what we thought, so here, we're just going to submit an adjustment and build the way we want, and we just need staff to approve it. So staff are often placed into an uncomfortable position of being very much pressured by a developer while also having to maintain adherence to our codes and regulations. There's also a perceived lack of transparency because those decisions are being made at that building, the building phase, the building permit phase. So there is no public process. And so this recommendation and work plan item is proposing to add public process for drainage adjustments. And with that, I'm going to hand it back over to David to describe a little bit more of what that looks like and what we're proposing.
Sure. Thank you, Danica. So as Danica described very well, there are times when we hear from an applicant that they can meet all of our code requirements through what I call a land entitlement process, and then at the construction process at the point in the construction permit process, they have realized that there maybe was a miscalculation in the elevation and the gravity won't work the way they thought it would, or there's a certain soil condition that is not amenable to a certain type of infiltration, or they thought a pipe they could connect to is no longer available because it's constrained downstream and they can't add water to it. It wouldn't work. There are many reasons why drainage adjustments are needed. And, oftentimes they're very legitimate. At other times, it might be a cheaper way to do things. And the best way for me to describe this is fortunately for us, the city of Sammamish is fairly simple in its lines of business. We have, at the low level, applicants who are coming in for permits for things that require a clear and grade permit, for maybe a landscaping change on your property, or maybe a building addition on your single-family home. Then, those are what are called Type 1 ministerial permits. So they don't require public notification unless there is some confounding factor like a critical area or something that might push it into a different process, or SEPA is required because of some constraint. But absent those conditions, it's a simple process. It's binary in nature. There's no public engagement. There's no public notification. There is no local appeal. So if somebody was upset or felt aggrieved by a permit that was issued, they have to go to Superior Court for an appeal. So that's the low level. The next level up is similar to that. That's the new single-family home. That's also a Type 1 process, where you have an existing vacant lot. You want a building permit to build a house. So once again, there's no public notice unless SEPA is required, or there's some other problem with the property, like a reasonable use exception or something. And there's also no appeal. So you can't appeal a Type 1 process locally. The next level is your Type 2 process, and that includes things like a preliminary short plat, or a variance, or a reasonable use exception. And these are projects that are a little more complicated than the Type 1s, but they do require public notice. They do require a decision be issued, and they do allow for a local appeal to the city's hearing examiner. And that's important. We'll talk about that in a minute. The next level is your Type 3 and 4 process. That includes things like a preliminary plat. It includes things like a shoreline substantial development permit that requires going to the city's hearing examiner for hearing examiner review and approval. Those do offer appeals, but those are to Superior Court. Typically, it promotes public engagement at the public hearing process. So as you can see, we have different levels of permitting. 3 tiers generally, those types of permits that don't require any sort of public involvement, that don't have any local appeal. Then there's those types that have public involvement, have a local appeal, and then there's the third type that has public involvement, has a public hearing, but does not have local appeal. The appeal goes to Superior Court. And those are all important distinctions when we start talking about the process in our code. So what we're looking at doing is amending the code to require early declaration for projects where drainage adjustments are proposed in order to deter adjustment requests received late in the process. What we would do we would achieve this by reorienting how and when drainage adjustment declarations are required to be received. So let's see. So the process, the concept is requiring declaration of intent to use drainage adjustment early in the process. If it's not declared early in the process or later identified by an applicant as necessary, then it would be processed as a type 2 application, which is the second level that I mentioned that requires public noticing, public comment, a decision, and an appeal period. It hopefully would deter most requests for drainage adjustment and would still allow for those with unique or challenging circumstances. As we said earlier in this presentation, there are actually many situations that really warrant an adjustment. And what we're trying to do here is to sort out those that really need one versus those that are pursuing one or proposing one because it's easier or cheaper. And what this would do is it would allow for members of the community to be made aware of the proposal. So say you lived downstream from a property and you were concerned about surface water being discharged onto your site, or you were concerned about erosion in a sensitive portion of the city or impacts to streams in the city. And you would be possibly upset to learn that the city was considering some adjustment or different method of managing stormwater on that property, and you were not made aware of it. So the first goal that we have, let me just check the next slide to make sure. The first goal that we have is to make sure that everyone around is aware when a drainage adjustment is proposed. We want to be processing drainage adjustments when warranted in full daylight. We don't want to have staff be put in the position of processing these behind closed doors where we're only engaging the applicant. We want neighbors to be aware. The next is we do learn quite a bit from the community regarding problems that are out there in the landscape, problems with drainage systems, and we want the community to be able to comment on an adjustment because we might learn something about that site or its position in the landscape, where it sits in the topography, what's below it, what's around it, what the soils are like, that might help influence whether or not it's really an appropriate method of managing stormwater. So we do value that public feedback. That's really important to us. And finally, we want an applicant, or excuse me, we want a neighbor or an applicant who feels aggrieved by a adjustment approval or an adjustment denial to be able to take it to the hearing examiner on an appeal. So the idea here is that for those projects where a drainage adjustment is not declared early, we would then require that it be processed as a type 2 application, public notice, public comment, decision issued, and a possible appeal period for anybody who feels aggrieved by the adjustment. Now that said, it's not quite that simple, and there are many other complications regarding type 3 and type 4 applications, regarding type 1 applications, and I'd be happy to get into those if you want. However, I think it'd be a good moment to take a break here and answer any questions.
So my question is, and I'll say what I believe I heard you describe, and you tell me if this is accurate or not. I believe what I heard you describe is a process revision that doesn't change the technical requirements, doesn't change the rules, no matter whether it's early, late, midstream, whatever. The outcome is likely to be technically, so from an engineering standpoint, the same, no matter whether they're asking for an adjustment early or ask for a late. The change is that if they ask for it, somebody asks for it late in the process, now we're going to require them to kind of back up a little bit and go back and do the public portion of the process to make sure that people have the opportunity that they would have otherwise had.
That's exactly correct. Yep.
So none of this will mean that we're somehow requiring people to do something different than they would have had to do anyway. It really just, about the only real difference is that there's some more time involved if it's not identified early.
And and it offers recourse to someone who feels aggrieved, local recourse to someone who feels aggrieved. Yep.
Okay. Anybody else have questions or comments about this? No?
So with that, and if there are more questions that pop up here, I'm happy to answer them. And again, as I mentioned previously, if any individuals, if this is weighing on your mind late into the evening, or you find yourself thinking about it, or you're curious about it, and you have more questions, and you want to reach out to myself or Danica individually, more than happy to talk on a separate channel with any individual commissioner about this. We've put a lot of thought into this and have some ideas about how to fix it, which we'll be bringing back on March 18th, which is the work session date to review draft revisions of the code. So sadly for us, but happy for her, Danica is departing the city for a job in a much warmer climate. So we'll be very sad to see her go, but very happy for her career progression on another part of the country. So she won't be included in this next work session. It'll be myself, and we'll find someone else in Public Works to help out with that, because I'm not necessarily a stormwater expert. And following that, on May 6th, we have scheduled a public hearing regarding the potential code changes. They're not, because we're not changing the technical requirements, this is not a very extensive code revision. It really is, how do we align the process properly to make sure that we're getting public engagement, public's aware of it, if someone's proposing this later in the process as opposed to earlier.
Okay. Any last thoughts? Danica, send us a picture of the sunshine so we can post it as our background on these conference call meetings.
Can do.
Josh, do you have something?
On these changes, I really like the direction it's going, but I'm curious if you anticipate any pushback from potential applicants on the way this process is being changed. Do you see any pitfalls in this move?
Yeah. So I shut down the presentation so I can see everyone's faces again because I'm on one screen. So apologies for that. Yeah. The downside to this is that somebody who is in a single family home type scenario might be pushed into a type 2 process. So for example, if you were pursuing permit for your single family home and you started into the process with what you thought, working with your designers, was a solid design, we're going to get this permit, come to find out that your site can't accommodate low impact development because it doesn't infiltrate properly, or the site is pretty flat, there's no topography, it won't drain properly. Danica could probably come up with a whole lot better example.
Yeah, I can give one very tangible one, and it was on Beaver Lake. And we had a very low threshold where we said, if you are doing basically anything, this person was adding a single family home, actually a pretty modest footprint for Sammamish, and they had to go through a full drainage review, including adding a flow control facility. And a flow control facility is usually a vault or a stormwater pond. Now, those are usually reserved for multiple homes. That's usually how they're designed. But because our code is so strict, we push single-family homeowners in these critical drainage areas, like on Beaver Lake and Pine Lake and in certain other areas. We said, no, you have to follow this code, and we will not grant an exemption, or we won't do any exceptions. You must follow the code. So this single-family homeowner, one house, was being told you have to build a vault on your property. And to do so, he would have had to remove major trees. It wouldn't have fit, first of all. It wouldn't have met the design criteria. And so that was a very good example of when he was actually extremely receptive to working with us, getting his engineer to be very creative, but it did require an adjustment. We did something a little different. We think we met the intent of the code, but I feel completely confident that we made the right decision for him and the environment.
So to answer the question, the one area that I find complex here is if you are a single family, if you're pursuing a new home on a vacant single family lot and you think you need a drainage adjustment early in the process, we would then turn your type 1 permit into a type 2 permit. We would require public notification, public comment. We would require a staff report and a decision be issued that's appealable locally. Whereas if you weren't proposing a drainage adjustment and you were following the drainage manual, if you could, right, then it would be a type 1 ministerial decision, which wouldn't require any sort of public comment. It wouldn't allow for a local appeal. So what it does is it makes anyone who's building on an existing single-family vacant lot more vulnerable to disruption in their permit process from somebody who's a neighbor. And we do, believe it or not, see the city's appeal process used as a method of resolving neighborly conflicts, unfortunately. So, you could see a scenario where one neighbor dislikes the fact that somebody's building on the lot next to them and wants to, for lack of a better term, flick the project a little and see it, slow down, cause harm to the person trying to build on it. So the thing that I would ask the commission to think about is this appropriate for a single family home on an existing vacant lot? We believe we could go either way with it as staff. We believe that it is appropriate for a land entitlement process. So a preliminary short plat, a preliminary plat, a reasonable use exception, a variance, a unified zone development permit, UZDP in the town center. These are all types of applications that already require public notification, that already ask for all of that. So the question to the commission is how do we right size this for those existing vacant lots and new single family homes on those vacant lots when they might be asking for an adjustment for the reasons like what Danica just described?
I think that's probably I'll go ahead, Josh.
That's very tough. Is there a way to understand the dollar impact on either the single family lot, and I realize there's likely a range, a big one, on this sort of thing, the impact on a family trying to make an adjustment to a single family lot versus the environmental impacts, the impacts of the environment and downhill neighbors who might be impacted? Is there examples that we can look at to kind of get a better idea of the benefits this might bring versus the negatives to a homeowner or a property owner, and use that to help weigh our decision-making process or evaluation?
I can jump in, David, if that's okay. And I can try to answer that a little bit, just kind of give you a primer. And then for more in-depth analysis, that might be something staff bring back to the commission. But for example, with the single-family homes, a lot of times the adjustments are requested because it's plain old not technically feasible to follow the manual in some of these very small instances. So there, it's not a money of dollars. You can throw $1 million, $2 million at something, but it still won't meet the manual's requirements because it's not technically feasible. And then if you think of it, also those smaller homes have lower impact than, say, a subdivision that is asking for a drainage adjustment and has a much broader impact. I can give one example numerically that's sticking out right now. There was recently a 9 or 10 lot, maybe 12 lot subdivision that requested an adjustment, and it was for a water quality facility going from a sand filter, which is large, to a slightly smaller type of filter system to treat water. And the difference for them was one lot. That because if the city approved an adjustment, they would be able to get an extra lot out of it. So you do the math on that, whatever a lot is worth. I don't have that number, but a couple $100,000, I'm not sure exactly. It's just to sum up, for the small homes or for the single family home projects, a high dollar, impossible to quantify dollars in some instances because it's impossible to meet some of our requirements, and lower impact. And then for the bigger projects, obviously bigger impact and a lot more zeros in the dollar amount.
But this change doesn't stop a single family a lot from going through those adjustments. It just makes, they have to front load it, or they have to go through a type 2 process, which is more stringent later. And that's when the additional costs could be incurred by the applicant that were unexpected. Is that, am I understanding that right? So either they can get an adjustment, but we're trying to front load it.
Yeah, and the only way for us to front load it, so to speak, is that if they're proposing an adjustment even early in the process, it would turn a type 1 into a type 2, because we don't really have, unless there's some other method of outreach, but then it's sort of you know, it's not meaningful outreach, right? You know, what we're always wary also of saying, hey public, we've got this this adjustment, but there's no comment on it. It's like, well, is that really meaningful outreach? Are we, you know, so I'm wary of that also. So this one is the one that we keep stumbling on internally. We can easily see a path forward with code changes for those type 2, type 3, and type 4 applications that are land entitlement, larger projects, requires somebody, you know, does some preliminary work on like a reasonable use exception. You have to do a lot of really deep site planning. So, and that also, I'll be quiet in a sec, but the other important thing here is this is why we're bundling this effort with the one that we started out with the education, because we want people to be aware that you can't just come in later in the process and say, oh, I need an adjustment, just give me the adjustment. So that's why education is so important here, is to make sure that those people that didn't really know about our stormwater rules and about the nuances and complexities of them are being informed early, so that they know that, hey, if I'm going to need to do an adjustment, I'm going to have to ask for that early as part of the actual permit process, and not come back later when I find it to be infeasible.
It seems to me that if the technical outcome is essentially the same either way, then the cost associated with that technical outcome, whether that's a different kind of a tank or whatever it is, or it is an adjustment, the cost related to that is kind of the same either way, because the outcome is the same. But you could also look at it that if this revision to the process causes people to recognize the need to do something different sooner, it could actually save them money, because then they don't pay an architect and an engineer to design something that won't work anyway, and then they usually would have to pay them to redesign it again. And if they had just known from the beginning, or somebody had found that there was a you know, extra effort that needed to be made, or an adjustment to the design that needed to happen, then they don't have to pay for it twice. They only have to hopefully pay for it once, or maybe 1.2 times or something like that. So I can see how, if it works and when it works, it could actually save people money rather than costing them money.
So the cost increase that we would see, so I agree with Chair Boffman in that regard. However, there is one cost increase, and that's the process cost. So running it through a public notice process, taking comment in, there's two expenses that are incurred there. The first expense is plain monetary. We put up a sign. We got to put a notice in the Seattle Times. We got to do a mailer. We also have to spend the time issuing a decision, and then there's the potential for appeal and all the cost that goes along with that. There's those costs. Then the other cost is the time, the cost incurred with time. You know, a building permit, in theory, if you get it right, like I was saying, if we did a first review decision on a building permit, you should be out the door in 4 weeks, no more than 4 weeks, with an approved permit. Very seldom does that happen. You know, usually I think we're around a 6-month timeline, and that includes a couple rounds of revisions, includes the applicant's, you know, time in correcting it. But most building permits are submitted and out the door within 6 months for construction, for non-platted, not recently platted lots. So the ones that are recently platted, that we already know the sites, we already know all the constraints and all the issues, we can get those out in a couple weeks. So The issue here is that if you add public comment, Sammamish has a 21-day comment period. We have a 21-day appeal period. There's time in between that for the review of public comment. So the issue that I have is it too heavy of a process for the benefit that you get? And it's a rhetorical question that I'm asking the commission of. I don't know the answer to that. We at the same time we want to make sure we're doing this right. We want to make sure the community is engaged and that everyone's informed and we're aware of problems where they exist. But we also don't want to be overly expensive in permitting and requiring a process that is too heavy for what you ultimately get out of it, right?
Okay, any other questions? Looks like no. Great. David, Danica, thank you.
Yep. Thank you all for listening to this, and we'll be back with some draft code amendments. Again, thanks for all the great questions and engaging on this.
Okay, next let's do public comment for agenda-related items. So any public comment related to this particular topic we've been discussing. Jackie, do we have any public comment?
We do. I'll go ahead and read this statement. Pursuant to the Governor's Emergency Proclamation 20-25, the city is unable to provide an in-person location for the public to listen to the virtual Planning Commission meeting. Meetings are still accessible to the public and public comment can be submitted. Up to 7 minutes of verbal public comment for agenda topics may be provided live during the meeting. In order to provide verbal public comment, you must call in. Please call the following number and input the access code when prompted. The phone number is 1-872-240-3311, and the access code is 699-839-229. Once you have joined, you'll be placed on mute. The meeting operator will unmute you when it's your turn to comment. You will hear an automated voice say unmuted when that occurs, and the operator will ask you to begin your comment. Please hang up when your comment is complete. We do have one caller so far. I will go ahead and unmute you, and you can begin your comment whenever you're ready.
Hi, this is Mary Wichter. I live at 408 208th Avenue Northeast in Sammamish for 20 years. And thanks for the great staff work presentations. We have really excellent staff, and the things you're talking through is super important. And I'm so sorry to hear that Danica is leaving us for warmer climate, but I do understand. So, and I really just appreciate David Pyle's great experience that he's had, and I know that there are other people that are at the city that are excellent too. So thanks to the Planning Commission for all the questions. So I don't know if Jackie can bring up the PDF that I had emailed in just right at 5 or just after 5 today, because I wanted to talk about a few things related to low impact development. And until I see that come up, I wanted to mention at the discussion here, it sounds like there's still a possibility for single-family homes on existing vacant lots, which there's a lot in Tamarack where I live, platted in 1964, and also in Inglewood, which was platted in 1889 when Washington was still a territory, and Inglewood's building at R17. So I think there's a lot of constrained lots that have, we've got 200-300 lots of those left, and I think there's 890 left citywide. So there's a large number of things that need to be looked at, and they shouldn't just drop through without having to go through the first 3 of the 4 phases that David discussed, or that we just want to stick with the type 1 because we're having problems in those areas. So what I brought up here on the first slide is the King County Surface Water Design Manual was adopted. The 2016 one started the first day of 2017, and when you search in it for LID or low impact development, there is one appearance of what's called a minimal excavation foundation. That is a type of low-impact development. It's not really discussed in the manual, but I know Tawny Dalzell, who's the predecessor to Danica, had brought my attention to it because most of the core requirement 9 for drainage review for low-impact development are infiltrating techniques, and that are technically infeasible in areas such as steep slopes, landslide hazards, and erosion hazard areas. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention. So hopefully you'll be able to read this slide later if you want, either on the video or I'll email it. I do want to show what other cities had done. Bellevue in 2016, next slide please, had done a map, and it's a red-green map. So if you're red-green colorblind, sorry about that, you probably won't be able to see the differences. But anywhere it's red, it's pretty much infeasible for infiltration, and you don't have to do additional study to figure that out. If it's green, it's potentially infeasible for low-impact development for filtration, but you do have to do required additional studies. And then the text box there has a whole list of things where you wouldn't want to put water into the soils because you could end up with contamination. So landfills, major utility corridors, water supply wells, slopes of 25% or greater, and like landslide hazards, shallow groundwater, and within buffers. Next slide, please. Also, I looked up this material in 2017 because the stormwater ordinance had passed, and then the low-impact development ordinance had also passed. So in Mercer Island, they had at the time these maps online, and if you can see the red there, red is where low-impact development is just not permitted at all. Green, which really only exists sort of in the bottom point of the island there, could be feasible, but you need to analyze the site in your pre-design. And then yellow soils are where infiltrating lid facilities could be feasible, but you have to do some looking there so the soils are moderate. So you can see most of Mercer Island, you really can't use lid at all, or LID. Next slide, please. Mercer Island also did a map for their soils, and so the outwash soils are kind of sandy, and that's where you have high infiltration potential, but you can also have water quality issues, and you can see the green down kind of at the bottom of Mercer Island there. And then up at the top, you can see the saturated soils. That's where poor infiltration is. And then till is in a large part of the middle part, which was yellow in the last slide. So there's different soils here. So I just wanted to show what other cities had done with their maps. Next slide, please. Mercer Island went one step further for LID or LID infeasibility for the King County Surface Water Design Manual. Like I said, erosion, landslide, seismic, and steep slopes, I believe, are supposed to be geologic hazards that are infeasible for low-impact development infiltrating LID, so you typically will need flow control. And if you're building a single-family home, usually you don't qualify to have to do water quality. Also, Mercer Island maps shallow groundwater where it's not within the other geohazard areas, and it talks about a 50-foot setback each. So next slide, please. So those are maps from Bellevue and Mercer Island that the cities had made or paid for. I think the Mercer Island ones were 2010, and Bellevue had done their draft in 2016, which is adopted now. So this next slide, if you can see it, it's very pink. It's Sammamish and the soils and the geology underneath it. And the dark pink is QVT or till soils. Till is where it's pretty hard, like hard pan. It's not really bedrock, but it's really hard to put low-impact development into the ground. So I know Ken Gamlin, one of the council members, really wanted LID to be required everywhere. And you just can't do it places. Like Danica said, it's really just not technically feasible to use, so you have to come up with other things. And then unfortunately on this map, whoever chose the colors, they also did the outwash soils in light pink, so it also looks pink. That is where you could put water into the soils for low impact development, but you also might be contaminating groundwater, so you have to look at the water quality and the flow control going into it. And then there's other areas. So I just wanted to bring up that these maps are super important. This map actually isn't a published one. It was done as part of one of the draft versions of the Stormwater Comp Plan for 2016, which was adopted that December. And is still with us. And I think that was before Danica worked on it, but that was a big year for stormwater in 2016 because the city had to switch from 1998 codes and 2009 codes to the 2016 codes that were ecology equivalent and had to be effective the 1st of 2017. So anyway, I wanted to bring these materials to you just because I think like if you look, there's just certain things that could be added to the code. If you've got underground storage tanks, or if you're near wells, you just can't use low-impact development everywhere. And where you've got septic systems, you might not want to put those by public water wells or even private water wells. So I just want to bring this information up again. Like I said, I offered it to the city in 2017 and actually sort of given up on it. But since low-impact development is back in front of council and staff is doing such a great job considering things, I wanted to re-show this information. So thank you for listening, for the time to speak today, and everything that staff does and the great commission questions. Thanks.
Thanks for your comments, Mary. That looks like that was our only caller for the evening, so I'll hand it back to you, Chair Boffman.
Thanks, Jackie. One quick thing here is just make sure you take a look at I'll encourage the commissioners to take a look at the calendar. Our upcoming meeting on March 4th is a pretty involved one with some pretty involved topics. So a work session on urban forest management plan and a work session on the phase 2 development regulations. So pay attention to that one. And then on March 18th, we have another session, a work session on this topic. And on April 1st, a work session for a more detailed dive into the phase 2 development regulations. So lots of good stuff kind of coming up here in the next couple months. Anything else before we adjourn?
Chair Baughman, if I could add to that also, I believe one of the meetings that's coming up in April for the phase 2 development regs is actually an early start meeting that we have planned for 5:30, and we wanted to make sure everyone was aware of that. And the reason for that is that you're going to see a lot more information come in front of you regarding our development regulations, and we need to have the time to get through that while still ending at a reasonable hour. I'm not sure of whether or not all of you like to end at 11:30, like some of the other meetings we attend, but we're hopeful that we can get out at a reasonable time if we start a little bit earlier.
And Chair Baughman, I'll just add.
Thanks for the heads up.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, Chair. I just wanted to add, in advance of the UFMP Strategic Implementation Plan meeting on March 4th, if anybody has any actions they'd like to recommend, please use the Connect Sammamish tool and get those in sooner the better, so they can be considered for potentially considered for the 21-22 work plan. So, thank you.
All right, 5:30 start. I'll be looking forward to that food delivery on my front step for an early dinner so that I can make sure I'm in the right mood for a 5:30 start. No? Oh, okay. All right, anything else this evening? If not, someone could move to adjourn.
So moved.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. We adjourn for the evening. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Great. Thank you, everyone. We will see you on March 4th. Thanks. Have a nice evening.
Thank you. Have a good evening.